Hey everyone, this is Megan. Welcome back. Tonight, we're going to do our skincare routine together while diving into a truly chilling horror story. So, gather your favorite serums and creams, sit close, and get comfortable because today's story is going to stay with you long after you turn off the lights. Now, I didn't plan it this way, but once again, we find ourselves in the Philippines. Is it just me, or does that place seem to be a magnet for ghosts? They just keep showing up. So there's a Korean TV show I absolutely love called, I think it's in English, Midnight Horror Stories. In Korean, it's called 심야괴담회. And sadly, I don't think they provide English subtitles, but if you understand Korean, you have to check it out on YouTube. It's terrifying in the best way. So tonight's story comes straight from that show. It's a first-hand account from a woman who experienced something very unsettling while living in the Philippines. And as you know, many Koreans move there for work or travel. Yeah, think about it. You're alone in a foreign country, far from home, and suddenly something weird happens. And that's exactly what happened to tonight's storyteller. She thought she was just living a normal life abroad until one night, the darkness around her felt just a little too heavy. The shadows moved just a little too strangely, and something began to watch her from the corners of her vision. She didn't believe in ghosts, not really, but that night changed everything. So take a deep breath, keep your skincare close, you might need it to cool your nerves, and let's step into our nightmare together. Okay. This story comes from a woman named Kim So-hee, who lived in the Philippines for 15 years. She had built a life there, comfortable and stable, until recently when something so terrifying happened that she fled the country as if running for her life. So let's go back to the summer of 2022. At that time, So-hee was working for a company in Manila. She had just landed a job at a major corporation. Her salary had gone up and things were looking better than ever. But what really made her feel like she had made it was the luxurious apartment her company provided. A multiple-story high-rise with a breathtaking panoramic view of Manila's skyline. From her living room, the city stretched endlessly beneath her. A dream come true. But the dream didn't last. As the excitement settled, she realized the downside of such a massive space. Cleaning and maintaining it alone. There was no way she could handle that on her own. So after some thought, she decided to hire a full-time live-in housemaid, someone who would stay there day and night to keep the place in order. And that's how she met Rachel. Rachel was in her mid-20s, cheerful, reliable, and meticulous in her work, the perfect maid. Thanks to her, the move-in process was seamless. So-hee quickly settled in, feeling more at ease with someone else in the house. Then one quiet Saturday morning, everything changed. So-hee was video chatting with her friend, Ju-yeon, who still lived in Korea. Ju-yeon was so excited that her friend landed a great job and was living in a luxurious apartment. So she said, "Show me your place." So So-hee flipped her camera around, giving her a virtual tour of the apartment. Sunlight streamed in through the enormous windows. The space looked perfect. Eventually, she turned the camera back to face herself, settling into a chair at the dining table. She was smiling mid-sentence when Ju-yeon suddenly interrupted. "Oh, who's that behind you?" So-hee froze. Behind her, just over her left shoulder, Rachel was standing completely still. So-hee hadn't heard her walk in. "Oh, that's my maid, Rachel," she said, startled but laughing it off. "Let me introduce you." She turned in her chair, and Rachel was gone. The hallway was empty. "Rachel?" She stood up, peering around the apartment. Maybe Rachel had stepped away quickly. Maybe she had been uncomfortable with the sudden attention. Or maybe Sohee had just been so absorbed in the call that she hadn't noticed her leave. But still, a feeling of unease crept up her spine. Trying to shake it off, she ended the call and decided to check in on Rachel. She walked over to Rachel's room and knocked lightly before pushing the door open. Rachel was inside. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, rubbing her eyes as if she had just woken up. When she looked up at Sohee, her expression was one of mild confusion. "Oh, Miss Sohee, when did you wake up?" she asked, sleep still thick in her voice. And Sohee's blood ran cold. "What?" Her stomach twisted. "You were just outside," Sohee said slowly. "I saw you. You were standing behind me." And Rachel blinked, tilting her head in confusion. Then, as if she hadn't even heard the question, she smiled and said, "Shall we eat? I'll make us breakfast." A suffocating unease settled over Sohee's chest. Something about Rachel's expression felt off. The smile was just too natural, like someone reciting lines from a script. But what could she do? She let it go. Maybe she was overthinking. Maybe she had imagined it. A few nights later, Sohee was working late in her second-floor bedroom, finishing up a project for work. The house was silent, and Rachel had already gone to bed. Then she heard a strange noise, a scratching sound, like... She ignored it, but it was getting louder. A low, grating noise like nails dragging against a wooden surface. It was coming from just outside her bedroom door. She stiffened, her hands hovering over her laptop. She held her breath. The sound continued, a slow, deliberate scraping. Her heart pounded in her chest. Was it Rachel? Was she awake? Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. Sohee threw open the door. The hallway was empty, and the scratching had stopped. Feeling her pulse in her throat, she slowly walked downstairs, scanning the apartment. And that is when she saw Rachel. She was in the living room, standing on the sofa. Not just standing, she was jumping. Rachel was bouncing on the cushions, her body moving in an eerie, rhythmic motion, like a child playing. But her expression was completely blank. Sohee froze in place. "Rachel?" she called out, her voice shaky. And Rachel stopped. Oh, I hate this part. She turned around slowly, and then she looked directly at Sohee, her head tilted to the side. And then she smiled. But it wasn't just a normal smile. It was too slow, stretching too wide. Her lips pulled back unnaturally, the corners of her mouth creeping upwards in a way that wasn't human. Her eyes never blinked. Sohee's body locked up in pure, primal fear. Her mind was screaming, "Run!" but her feet were rooted to the floor. Rachel took a small step forward. That smile was still growing, wider and wider, as if her skin would tear. Sohee felt something cold and sharp twist in her stomach, and at that moment she knew the woman standing in front of her wasn't Rachel anymore. Panic gripped Sohee's chest as she bolted up the stairs, heart pounding like a war drum. She threw herself into the bedroom, locked up the door, and pressed her body into the darkest corner of the room. And then Rachel was running. No, sprinting. Her footsteps were pounding against the floor, coming straight for Sohee's room. Sohee's breath hitched. Why was she running? Was that really Rachel? Something about the unnatural way she had smiled just minutes ago made Sohee's skin crawl. And then silence. Rachel never knocked, never called out her name. And for the longest time, Sohee stayed curled up in that corner, holding her breath, waiting for something, anything to happen. but it never did. And then the sun rose. She couldn't bring herself to leave the bedroom, even as morning light filtered through the curtains, even as the sounds of normal life returned. Her body refused to move past her door. Then, that sound again. Her breath caught the same sound, the one she had heard outside her door that night. And then a voice, bright, cheerful, familiar. "Miss Soy, are you awake?" Rachel. Soy swallowed hard. When she finally opened her door, Rachel stood there, looking completely normal, as if the night before had never happened. But Soy couldn't meet her eyes, because every time she tried, all she could see was that horrific stretching smile burned into her memory. And later that day, she called her friend Chuyun to tell her everything. And Chuyun's reaction was, "That's insane. How can you keep living with her after that? Just tell her you need to replace her. It's not worth it." And maybe Chuyun was right. Maybe Soy should have let her go. She was seriously considering it when Rachel suddenly approached her. "Miss Soy," Rachel said softly, watching her carefully. She said, "What's wrong? You look so tired. Are you not feeling well?" Before Soy could answer, Rachel held something out, a small packet. "Here," she said with a smile. "It's a bath bomb. My friend gave it to me as a gift. Maybe a nice bath will help you relax." And Soy hesitated. For the first time in days, Rachel seemed normal. She even looked genuinely concerned. And at that moment, a wave of guilt washed over her. Maybe she really had been imagining things. Maybe she had been too paranoid. After all, Rachel had been nothing but kind to her before all this. So, pushing her doubts aside, Soy accepted the gift. And that night, she decided to use it. The bath bomb fizzed and foamed, filling the tub with a soft, fragrant lather. Soy left the bathroom briefly, giving it time to dissolve while she tidied up. When she returned, something was floating in the water. She frowned. A strand of hair. Long, black hair. At first, she just brushed it off. Maybe a strand of hair had been stuck to the bath bomb packaging. But then, something brushed against her hand. Her breath caught. Beneath the bubbles, a shape was forming slowly, too slowly. Something began to rise. A face. Pale, waterlogged skin, wide, unblinking eyes, a nose barely above the waterline. And that mouth, that awful, stretching smile. Rachel. Soy screamed. She stumbled backward, nearly slipping as her heart slammed against her ribs. What was happening? What the hell? And then a voice, panicked, coming from outside the bathroom door. "Miss Soy, are you okay? Please open the door." Soy's stomach dropped. Her head whipped toward the floor. It was Rachel's voice. Rachel was outside. Rachel was also in the water, watching her, smiling. Terror unlike anything she had ever felt before gripped her entire body. She fumbled for the door handle and threw it open. Rachel stood there, breathing hard, her face filled with concern. But when Soy whipped around to look at the bathtub, it was empty. No face, no floating hair, nothing. Her hands shook violently. Had she just imagined it? Was she losing her mind? Rachel took a step closer, gently touching Soy's arm. "Miss Soy, you're shaking. Are you okay?" Soy just couldn't look at her, because for the first time she realized even Rachel's normal expression terrified her. So she forced a shaky breath and lied. "Yeah, I think I just dozed off in the tub. I must have had a nightmare." Rachel paused. And then she said something that made Soy's blood turn to ice. "Oh, I see, but you didn't see anything, did you?" Soy's stomach clenched. What kind of question was that? Why phrase it like that? Normally, someone would say, "Did something happen?" or "What's wrong?" Not, "You didn't see anything, did you?" It was like a warning, a challenge maybe, or a threat. And then, as if nothing had happened, Rachel gave her that same soft smile and said, "Well, if you need me, I'll be in my room." From that moment on, Soy watched her closely, and the more she observed, the worse it got. Once, she saw Rachel lingering outside her bedroom, whispering in hushed tones on the phone. She couldn't make out the words, but something about her body language felt tense, urgent. Then one night, Soy woke up to the smell of smoke. She rushed out of her room, only to find Rachel kneeling in the center of the living room, muttering, chanting, a small pile of ashes smoldering in front of her. Her hands trembled over the flames as she whispered something under her breath. It looked like some sort of ritual. But what was she burning, and why? And that was when Soy's fear turned to certainty. Rachel wasn't just strange, she was probably dangerous. And the more Rachel's bizarre behavior escalated, the sicker Soy became. Her body weakened, her skin grew pale, her energy drained faster each day. Something was terribly wrong, very, very wrong. And she knew, without a doubt, Rachel had something to do with it. For months, Soy was not herself anymore. The sleep paralysis became unbearable. Her body grew weaker, her mind darker. Some nights, she found herself staring out the window, thinking, wouldn't it be easier just to jump? The thought came so casually, so frequently, too frequently. And that's when she knew this was dangerous. She had to get out. After much deliberation, she made her decision. She submitted her resignation, booked a ticket home to Korea, and told Rachel, "I'm leaving in 2 weeks. Thank you for your help, but you don't have to clean my room or the second floor anymore." For the remaining days, she kept her distance. She avoided Rachel as much as possible, speaking only when necessary. Then, on her last night in Manila, she had a farewell dinner with her coworkers. By the time she got home, it was late. Exhausted, she walked up to her room, pushed open the door, and froze. Rachel was sitting on her perfectly made bed, humming. She turned slowly, her eyes locking into Soy's. Then the door slammed shut. The wind? No, there was no wind. Soy's breath shuddered. She whipped her head around. Nothing. She turned back. Rachel was gone. Where did she? And that is when she saw it. Strands of black hair peeking out from under the bed. I really hate this part. She's gonna kneel down and look under the bed, right? "Rachel, come on, stop joking." Soy's voice was unsteady. Her body shook as she took a small step forward. But Rachel never responded. Soy's pulse pounded, her mind screaming at her to run, but she had to know. She had to see. So she knelt down. She lifted the blanket, and it wasn't Rachel. A child's face stared back at her, pale, expressionless, eyes too wide. She screamed, scrambled back, heart racing. But before she could stand, something else moved. A man's face, skin peeling, and a woman's face, burned, twisted, both of them staring at her. Then, "We nasia, we nasia." Their voices were low, raspy. They took a step closer, sniffed the air. "We nasia." The whisper turned into a chant. They were getting closer. No escape, nowhere to run. Soy clamped her hands over her ears, shut her eyes tight. And then something pounded on the walls, the voices growing louder, pressing against her skull, until suddenly everything went dark. She passed out. When she woke up, she was on the floor, her body was shaking. Her face was wet with tears, and Rachel was there, kneeling beside her. "Miss Sui, are you okay?" Sui jerked away. The room was empty. No child, no burned woman, just Rachel. Just Rachel, who now looked scared. Then Rachel's gaze shifted past her. Her face paled. "Miss Sui, did you do that?" Sui turned slowly, her breath caught in her throat. The walls were covered in handprints, some big, some small, pressed in every direction, like something had been trying to crawl out. And in that moment, Sui's mind flashed back to the night before, to the hands reaching out from beneath the bed. Her voice trembled. "Rachel, what does Rinasia mean?" Rachel hesitated. Then softly she answered, "It means she's going home." Sui broke down. Through heavy sobs, she told Rachel everything. Rachel listened quietly, her face growing more serious. Then, after a long pause, she said, "You know, I felt something strange in this house too." She looked away, as if choosing her words carefully. "I even asked my mother about it, and she told me," Rachel swallowed, "we need to speak to someone." And that night, a village shaman came to the apartment. The moment he stepped inside, he froze. Then his face darkened. Rachel translated, "There are spirits here. They have been here much longer than you. You never asked permission to live among them. They were angry. And now that you're leaving," the shaman gestured toward the handprints on the wall, "they don't want to let you go." A chill slithered down Zui's spine. The shaman sighed, shaking his head. "They will make sure you don't leave easily." And that was the last night Sui ever spent in that house. The next morning, she packed her bags without looking back. The Philippines has been her home since she was in middle school. For 15 years, she had loved it. But after that night, she knew she would never return. So this concludes our story. Or does it? Because sometimes when you leave a place haunted, something follows you home. You know, as if I was telling today's story, one question kept nagging at me. Was this really just about a haunted house? Or was Rachel actually involved? Did she somehow bring those spirits with her? And if she knew something, why did she pretend not to? I don't know, the more I think about it, the more unsettling it becomes. What do you think? Stories like this always make me realize just how important it is to be careful when moving into a new house. I mean, how can we ever really know what kind of history a house holds? Even in Korea, people just pay close attention to feng shui before moving. They avoid places with heavy, stagnant energy because bad things tend to happen in houses like that. It's not just superstition, it's just, I think, it's common sense. Dark places attract dark things. And honestly, I have experienced it myself. When I was younger, from middle school to college, I lived in a house that just didn't feel right. I was constantly getting sleep paralysis. I would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in cold sweat, unable to move, sometimes even seeing things in darkness. At that time, I brushed it off. Maybe I was just too stressed. Maybe my body was just tired. But thinking back now, I can't shake the feeling that something else was there. Have any of you ever experienced something like that? Have you ever lived somewhere that felt off? Somewhere that seemed to drain your energy or make you feel like you weren't alone? Was it just exhaustion, a trick of the mind? Or was something really there? Let's think about it. And if you've had a similar experience, share it with us. I'd love to hear your stories. And that is it for tonight's tale. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll be back next time with another chilling story. Until then, sleep well and sweet dreams if you can.